Good morning, everyone. My name is Priya Sood. I am the coordinator of the Global Alliance for Reporting Progress on Peaceful, Just, and Inclusive Societies. Myself and the TAP Network welcome you to this exciting event. We are thrilled and delighted to be launching our mainstreaming SDG16 resource using the Voluntary National Review to advance peaceful, just, and inclusive societies. This has been a process that's been ongoing for the last few months. The Global Alliance is a multi-stakeholder platform that consists of member states. It's led by member states, UN agencies, civil society, and private sector to advance progress on reporting, specifically and monitoring of SDG16. Our colleagues, our partners, the TAP Network, Transparency and Accountability Participation Network, are a civil society network, and they're one of our major significant partners that we've been working with together to really accelerate SDG16 in this decade of action. I just wanted to note that the webinar is being recorded. We will be posting it on the SDG16 Hub, so other participants that weren't able to join could listen in on it. And I would like to introduce, we have a very exciting agenda ahead. I would like to introduce one of our member state partners, Ambassador Juan Sandoval. He's has served as Deputy Permanent Representative of Mexico to the UN since 2015, and he's representing he's the chair of the group of friends of VNRs here in New York. He's a career diplomat, and he joined the Mexican Foreign Service in 1992 and was promoted to the rank of ambassador in 2014. He has been elected vice president of ECOSOC for the 2020 and 2021 and will preside over the integration segment. He's also the president of the working group on amendments of the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, and he chairs, as I mentioned, the group of friends on VNRs, so we felt it was imperative that he be here. We're very grateful, and please take it away, Ambassador Sandoval. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very good morning to everybody. I would like to begin by thanking the TAP Network and Global Alliance for having me today as chair of the group of friends of the VNR and follow-up of implementation of Agenda 2030. I want to join you in welcoming everyone, especially those countries who will be presenting their voluntary national reviews at next year's high-level political forum. Our main objective as chair of the group of friends of VNRs is to support those presenting and guide them through the interactive process in the 2021 HLPF. I am glad to say that SDG16 will have a prominent place in it. This year, Mexico will join them as a VNR presenting country as well. Mexico has presented VNRs twice before, in 2016 and 2018. Our VNR preparations led to budget alignment with the SDGs, including SDG16 for longer-term national planning. Through the partnership between the Office of the Presidency, our Ministry of Finance, and UNDP will develop a methodology to monitor and evaluate how our budget contributes to the realization of the SDGs. In 2018, over 80% of our budgetary programs were linked already to Agenda 2030. Many of the lessons learned at the national level also resulted in our first voluntary state review, our BSR, led by the state of Oaxaca. In 2019, the resource being presented at this workshop shares Oaxaca's plans to link SDG16 with their state initiative through the procurement of key alliances, partnerships, and community engagements, and shines as a very promising endeavor that will surely be replicated in states across Mexico and beyond. I am very pleased to announce that as part of Mexico's ongoing commitment to implementation of the 2030 Agenda, a special working group has been convened on SDG16 precisely in the context of the National Council of the 2030 Agenda. This interministerial group will contribute actively to the VNR. As a transformational and enabling goal, SDG16 is key to achieving the 2030 Agenda as a whole. It lies at the core of UNDP's mandate as the principal development organization of the UN system. All countries should commit to stronger and new partnerships that are required to deliver on SDG 16. We need to break the silos and recognize the relationship between injustice, inequality, and violence, and the need to adopt a multidisciplinary approach across sectors to address multidimensional poverty. This is the whole of government's whole of society promise. They will be highlighted through this event. SDG 16 is also an important organizing framework in addressing key challenges related to COVID-19 response and long-term recovery efforts, strengthening institutional capacity and legitimacy, and improving oversight of the socioeconomic response efforts is something we can all use. It is my hope that the 2021 HLPF will be an opportunity to showcase progress and mobilize action around effective decision-making on SDG 16. If you strengthen your SDG 16, you strengthen your capacity to deliver on all the SDGs, because we're talking about institutional strengthening of our government. Because of its human element, the essence of this specific SDGs is the fight to ensure that human liberties, such as the right to life, access to justice, and right to be included, are respected and nurtured in order to create an environment conducive to sustainable growth. The group of friends of VNR will be continuing to advocate for the cross-cutting nature of SDG 16. We have great opportunities this year to highlight advances and challenges, not only in the HLPF, but in the UNGAS against corruption. It is my hope that this workshop will show all participants the value added of partnerships with civil society and the UN system. You have here the opportunity to act now so that you have a success story to share in July. Please count on us to make it happen. Count on Mexico. We're ready to help you to make the matchmaking for your questions and also to improve, to strengthen all the process during these very particular times we are living. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Sandoval. Fully agree. I think we are a group here very much committed to advancing SDG 16. And yes, the UNGAS is, on anti-corruption is very high on all of our sight lines, as well as the HLPF 2021. As we all know, SDG 16 is being reviewed amongst 8 other SDGs, and very much in times of response to COVID-19. Without taking any more time, I wanted to introduce our next speaker. Jose Vicente Troya is the resident representative of UNDP in Costa Rica. He's had over 25 years of experience in the areas of environment and economic development, specializing in conservation, renewable energy, adaptation and mitigation of climate change, sustainable development, and protection of marine ecosystems. He has extensive experience with UNDP, but also with UNHCR, with UNOPS, and the Inter-American Development Bank. We welcome UNDP to the call. They've been very active on developing this resource and providing many inputs, many of the case studies that will be super useful to those all over. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you. Good morning to everyone. It's a pleasure to share these opening remarks at this important network. I especially greet the representatives on the TAP network, and especially Margaret Williams, author of the resource that will be presented today. The world is witnessing a decline in human development for the first time in 30 years, alongside deepening inequalities. SDG 16 and its components of peace, justice, and inclusion are vital to safeguard progress across the entire SDG spectrum and to leave no one behind. As a transformational and enabling goal, SDG 16 is key to achieving the Agenda 2030 as a whole. It lies at the core of UNDP's mandate as the principal development organization of the UN system. SDG 16 is also a key component of UNDP's overall SDG offer as an integrator across the implementation of the SDGs. As part of the multi-stakeholder platform, the Global Alliance for Reporting Progress on Peaceful, Just, and Inclusive Societies, we are committed to stronger and new partnerships that are required to deliver on the SDGs. On the SDG16 especially, we need to break the silos and recognize the relationship between justice, inequality, and violence, and the need to adopt a multidisciplinary approach across sectors to address multidimensional poverty. This is the whole of government, the whole of society's promise. The case studies in the Global Alliance and TAP network resource demonstrates the opportunities in the VNR and the post-VNR process to maximize partnerships in advancing peace, justice, and inclusion. SDG16 is an important organizing framework in addressing key challenges related to COVID-19 response and long-term recovery efforts. Leveraging the SDG16 framework can help strengthen institutions' capacities and legitimacy to improve and oversight the socio-economic response efforts, supporting accountable monitoring and reporting on SDG16 targets. Investing in the voluntary national reports is an important means of promoting effective monitoring and reporting on the SDG16 at the national and local levels. It provides a channel for inclusive policy and dialogue and improve access to quality information and freedom of expression and civil society engagement in decision-making. The VNR process is also an important part of how countries will recover from COVID-19 while continuing to deliver on the Agenda 2030. It offers opportunities to showcase progress, mobilize action, and effective decision-making on SDG16. Strengthening the incorporation of the SDG16 Plus in the voluntary country reports will also have a positive impact on the Universal Periodic Review, which is the main mechanism to support progress by member states on human rights and SDGs, as well as on the prevention and sustaining peace agendas. What are the lessons on VNRs and SDG16 from Costa Rica? Costa Rica presented its first VNR in 2017, and most recently its second VNR in 2020 at the high-level political forum. The second VNR was prepared with a wide interinstitutional and multi-sectoral participation. A consultation process was held with signatories of the National Pact for the Advance of the SDG represented in the National Advisory Committee, including private sector, unions, universities, NGOs, and faith-based organizations, the judiciary, the legislative branch, among others. Given the COVID-19 emergencies, an online consultation was implemented to collect relevant information from the different actors who had the opportunity to review a draft of the document to guarantee the inclusion of their contributions. This process was technically accompanied by the Office of the Resident Coordinator and the United Nations agencies, including UNDP. This represents a good practice of intersectoral and participatory work and accountability exercise on the part of the government. An analysis of national indicators for the SDG monitoring, in the case of the SDG16 indicators, shows favorable trends in 18%, challenges in 64%, and uniform trends in another 18%. Among the challenges, the behavior of the homicide rate stands out with a tendency to increase. In this matter, the increase in femicide and violence against women in general is cause of concern. The report mentions two good practices that I want to share with you. Both are technically supported by UNDP. The first is the effort of the judiciary to design and implement an institutional work plan from the perspective of the SDG16+, with the objective of integrating the entire 2030 agenda into judicial work. The other experience is with the Legislative Assembly, which has designed with our support a proposal to promote alignment of all legislation to the Agenda 2030. Despite the great challenges, Costa Rica is a world example of democracy, the rule of law, and peace building. This is why we are very optimistic that this country will host the forthcoming 16+ Forum annual showcase under the theme Building Peace Through the Rule of Law, Inclusion, and Good Governance next year. We are sure that this global meeting will be a very valuable opportunity to promote the construction of a roadmap to advance in the fulfillment of the 2030 Agenda through the SDG16. This resource that is presented today provides policy guidance and case studies on advancing SDG16 implementation at national and subnational levels by more effectively leveraging voluntary national review and post-voluntary national review processes. It is intended for a broad range of actors and institutions at all levels to support impactful reporting on SDG16 and aims to address the following question. How can we ensure that the voluntary national report is maximized for the SDG16 impact, include improved subsequent reporting? Finally, since 2016, there has been an increase in the number and quality of the voluntary national reports, indicating their growing relevance and utility for governments and other stakeholders. As of HLP 2020, 205 voluntary national reports have been presented from 168 countries, more than twice as many countries, 47, presented in 2020 than in 2016. Well-functioning coordination structures are in and for of themselves a means of SDG16 implementation. However, while 85% of countries provided information on follow-up and review processes at the national level in 2019, often through coordination structures, how reporting occurs by whom and to whom was unclear, ultimately pointing to issues of accountability. This resource highlights the role of parliaments and supreme audit institutions, from government audits and SDG implementation and integrating anti-corruption mechanisms to parliamentary committees reporting back on government's VNR and integrating the SDGs into the work of parliament. Whether as related to strengthening institutions, increasing access to decision-making, reducing corruption, or supporting the rule of law, these bodies are directly relevant to SDG16 implementation. While nascent, there is growing acknowledgement of their role and fulfilled potential in supporting VNRs and post-VNR processes. Fundamental to accountability and to the whole of society approach is civil society engagement in VNR design, delivery, and follow-up. This is particularly true amidst shrinking civic space. Meaningful and diverse civil society participation in VNR processes not only reflects inclusive and effective governance and decision-making, but also helps to ensure SDG16 related provisions in a VNR are taken forward. Civil society also plays a key role in supporting those most at risk of being left behind by filling data gaps, providing relevant programming, and advocating for groups not otherwise properly seen or heard. Other important stakeholders that are highlighted in the resource include academia and research institutions, especially in terms of monitoring and reporting, the media and journalists in terms of accountability, awareness raising, and access to information, and the private sector. A foundational tenet of the 2030 Agenda, the promise to leave no one behind, highlights the importance of inclusion, engagement, and impact from the ground up. Local and regional governments with strong democratic and accountable institutions are prerequisites for achieving SDG16. According to 2019 localizing the SDG reports, 42% of countries reporting in 2019 consulted LRGs in VNR preparation, and only 33% were involved in national coordination mechanisms. Particularly now, as communities globally continue to struggle with COVID-19, it is critical to focus on localizing SDG16, and to this end, to link in VNRs with voluntary state reviews and voluntary local reviews. Data continues to challenge the SDG16 progress tracking, affecting not just coverage, but also the quality of data available for SDG16 and related targets. However, such challenges may also present an entry point for diverse stakeholders to in-quality data collection and disaggregation, as well as monitoring and reporting. Particularly in COVID-19 world, more innovative and inclusive ways of generating, incorporating, disaggregating, and managing data are needed. Ultimately, greater coherence, communication, and collaboration are required among national statistics offices, UN custodian agencies, national human rights institutions, civil society, and other data providers. When designing VNR processes, immediate steps should be identified, such as reporting back to Parliament and or the media about the VNR presentation, as well as longer-term implementation. SDG16 is set to again be under review in 2021. Against a COVID-19 backdrop and with only 10 years left in the Agenda 2030, the next VNR process brings with particular challenges as well as important opportunities in supporting countries and other stakeholders towards transformative change. To ensure that the world emerges from the COVID-19 crisis stronger, the UN, all governments, and all partners need to stay the course together. Indeed, the decade of action, a decade of accountability, are rallying calls for more collaborative and innovative action, political mobilization and investment. In a world such as ours, collectively doubling down on SDG16 through VNR processes and as a goal and as an enabler is pressing as ever. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much as well. Thank you for going over some very key elements of SDG16, really focusing on the Leave No One Behind agenda and really trying to figure out how we can become more inclusive as we move forward. Moving on, just so the audience knows, we will have a Q&A towards the end of the speaker list, but we would like, I would like to introduce two individuals. First is John Romano, coordinator of the TAP network. He's based out of New York. He's worked with several SDG organizations such as the Stakeholder Forum for Sustainable Future and the Natural Resources Defense Council. He's been a global champion and advocate of civil society engagement throughout since post-2015, continues to wave the civil society engagement and inclusive nature of the 2030 agenda. And many of us are familiar with him, so I don't think we need to go into great detail, but he's a super champion. I'm actually honored to work with him as a colleague over this past year. The amount of commitment and devotion that he's given to this project and to so many others, I cannot even list. So he is going to go over the why of this resource, really, why he was so committed to it, and we all were so committed to it, and the importance of it. Secondly, I'd like to introduce Margaret Williams, who devoted her soul to this resource over the last 6 months. Again, the level of dedication and commitment and professionalism is astounding. She is a published international development affairs professional with 10 years of experience in partnerships and relationship building, policy, programming, and project management. Again, very much engaged on the Sustainable Development Goals, peace building and prevention, youth empowerment, youth peace and security, gender equality, and sociopolitical analysis. Many of you are probably familiar with her for her role in actioning the 16 Plus Forum for the last 3 years, and now she's really contributing in different ways to different products, and so she's going to go over the key guidance and some of the more detailed details that are useful that are in the actual resource, and I will post the resource. I hope you've had a chance to look at it. There's an executive summary as well as the entire resource on the SDG16 Hub. I'll post it shortly. Take it away, John.
Great, thanks a lot, Priya, and thanks a lot for everyone here for joining us. I think obviously we're really excited to share this resource with all of you. I think as Priya and others have mentioned, this has been a work in progress over the past several months, the better part of the past year or so. It's included a lot of consultation. Part of the point of this entire resource is that we wanted to showcase some of the best practices and the approaches that you all have taken, whether you're from a government or from a civil society stakeholder, the private sector, or parliaments. We really wanted to showcase the really diverse range of stakeholders that engage in the VNR process, but then subsequently the follow-up from the VNR process. Obviously, really important. Reporting on progress on the SDGs and SDG16 plays a critical role, obviously, in identifying where the challenges are when we're talking about implementation. But then ultimately, what we were really struggling with was how do we ensure that the focus goes beyond reporting? Obviously, again, reporting is important, and reporting is important for identifying the challenges and the gaps that we have in progress and in implementation. But the question that we were struggling with was, how do we ensure that the VNR itself translates into action? And what happens after the VNR process is just as important as everything that leads up to it. And especially with SDG16 under review at the 2021 HLPF, we'll have a renewed focus in July of next year on this as well. And I think part of the point here is that a lot goes into producing a VNR, and from a wide range of stakeholders, as we've heard so far. And so again, how do we take advantage of that momentum built during the VNR process itself and sustain it? And how do we use it to actually mainstream and implement SDG16 and then subsequently prepare for that next VNR report in the next cycle? And so we know that there are plenty of examples of where a wide range of stakeholders are doing this well. And we wanted to take from those examples and create a resource that really unpacks these best practices and approaches to mainstreaming SDG16 after the VNR report is presented. So that's a little bit of background on the report itself. Obviously, with the holidays coming up, I expect that everyone will fully dive into the resource in your free time. It is a very interesting resource, but I'll let Maggie, who is our consultant who took on this project, I'll let her provide some of the details on what this resource includes. So Maggie, please.
Great. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Priya. Thank you, John. David, it was an honor to work with all of you and spend so much time together this summer pulling this together and making it happen. It was truly a collective effort, and I was very grateful and humbled by the process. So thank you. I wanted to just quickly add a little bit of additional background to what all the speakers have said and to complement what the speakers have said, which is that COVID-19 has very much exposed and exacerbated inequalities, it's challenged institutions and further strained social contracts, setting us further back not only in realizing SDG16, but also all of the SDGs. This has been made clear by the Secretary General's 2020 progress report, as well as recent numbers from the World Bank. COVID-19 is likely now to push back between 88 and 115 million people into extreme poverty in 2020, setting us back by about 3 years in terms of poverty reduction. Speakers have already mentioned its impact on institutions, on access to justice, governance, peace building, prevention. So we really hope, the idea is that this resource can really be used by all practitioners, policymakers, thought leaders, communities in order to strengthen SDG16 implementation, SDG16 plus implementation through the VNR. So as John has mentioned, the point of this resource was action. How do we make the VNR more actionable, and how do we drive the energy that is required to produce a VNR and drive it forward after a VNR? And how do we do this in the most inclusive way? How has this been done in the most inclusive way? So it's the design, it's the production, it's the presentation, the follow-up, the implementation, and the subsequent reporting. That entire cycle we try to cover in this guidance resource. So to this end, we relied heavily on the valuable inputs and time and collaboration across a host of actors. And we just wanted to take a minute here to say thank you. And this, from the member state side, this includes governments, ministries, institutions, people working at all levels from local to national. This includes parliamentarians, parliamentary experts, civil society organizations operating at the multilateral level, the local grassroots level, businesses, private sector actors, media, journalists, academia. So a huge thank you to everybody who spent time with us over the summer providing their inputs. This resource is a compilation of over 40 interviews. So just to say, we tried our best to make it as inclusive as possible, but we would not have been able to do so if people didn't provide their time and input. So thank you for that, a sincere thank you for that. We also wanted to make this resource as practical as possible. So you will find that there's quite a bit of guidance in this resource. And a lot of that has to do with not just the different stakeholders that are involved, but the processes that go into the production and the follow-up to a VNR. And he had highlighted throughout the resource the importance of linking the VNR to national and local policies, frameworks, and development plans, so that it's not kind of an exercise or a report in and of itself, but that it falls within a larger national and local context, and as well as a regional context. So with this kind of backdrop, I would like to kind of quickly go through some of the key takeaways that the resource offers, mentioning that this presentation will not be able to cover all that is in the resource. So we do encourage you to read it, and also to highlight that while the resource should be seen as a collective whole, we also try to break out, because there is so much information in here, we try to break out the chapters into digestible segments. So please read the whole thing if you're interested, but if there are particular stakeholder groups or particular processes that you are more interested in, more or less interested in, that we try to break up the resource to make it also accessible for those who don't want to spend their entire holiday reading through this. So with that, a couple of additional key takeaways, which is first and foremost, the importance of coordination, coherence, and again, tying the VNRs to ongoing policies, practices, and plans, often through SDG coordinating bodies at a national level. In addition, what came out quite clearly through the resource, through research and through interviews, was the importance of oversight bodies and accountability mechanisms. This includes the role of supreme audit institutions, parliaments, human rights institutions, electoral management bodies, and the importance of these institutions and actors to government processes, both in terms of providing input and feedback, but also in terms of accountability, as had been mentioned, for example, in terms of Parliament and Parliament reporting back to government on their adherence to and presentation of a VNR. There is quite a bit here now also on the importance of civil society inclusion, and while we always say to move beyond a box-ticking exercise, what that actually means. So how can civil society organizations at kind of various levels, local to international actually, be included as partners and be included in the entire cycle of a VNR? Civil society is often the link to communities and individuals, and without them, there's quite a gaping hole in terms of what a VNR captures and how it can be followed up upon. So this highlights the unique role of civil society organizations, as well as their diversity and their ability to meaningfully advance and advocate for a leave no one behind approach. It should say that this resource comes at a time when civil society space is increasingly shrinking across the board and across the globe, as citizen demand is increasing. So in pushing for continuous, sustainable, and meaningful civil society inclusion at all levels, and is linked to ongoing policies, practices, and plans, is key. Further linked to this is the importance of local, whether this is local and regional governments or local leaders, non-state leaders. It's very, very important to try to bring in, through the VNR, through a national process, local voices, local perspectives, and to strengthen that vertical coordination, not just the horizontal coordination at a national level. So what you'll see here in the resource, the importance of voluntary state reviews, which was mentioned earlier, voluntary local reviews, and other means by which local actors can be meaningfully engaged and sustainably engaged in the process. The resource also highlights the importance of other stakeholders, private sector journalists, media, academia, and the first voluntary university review, and the importance of data, which we talk about all the time, but data collection, disaggregation, monitoring, reporting, and broadening sources, as well as using complementary reporting mechanisms and complementary reporting cycles. The UPR, for example, was mentioned earlier in this presentation, or this launch. This resource also talks about financing and partnerships, which we always also talk about, but in an environment of decreasing or declining ODA, and now with funds understandably being diverted to more immediate COVID-19 concerns and responses, this also bears mentioning in this presentation. And the importance of partnerships here, what can be done in terms of different multi-donor funds, other funds, etc. And then, of course, looking to the design of the VNR for greatest impact. So there's quite a bit in this resource, and we really do encourage you all to read through it. I know we're going to go through, we'll have time for a Q&A at the end, but the idea behind this resource was not just to provide you with a bunch of background information, but to provide you with concrete case studies and additional resources to use. So whether this is, this has to do with the role of national budget offices, whether this has to do with parliamentary committees, whether this has to do with VLRs, voluntary local reviews, voluntary state reviews, how civil society organizations that are already part of complementary dialogue processes can then be included into into a VNR. The importance of SDG corruption dashboards produced by civil society and then used by offices of national statistics. All of this is included in each of the chapters. And again, thanks to the 40+ interviews that we were able to conduct earlier this summer. So there's guidance, there are key resources, and there are case studies. And the idea is, again, for you to please use what is here to advance SDG16 in your own contexts and spaces. We are in this, we do have the decade of action and accountability upon us, and it will be much more challenging than I think any of us would have ever foreseen. So as we move together in the next 10 years, in order to achieve SDG16 and all the SDGs, we hope that you'll be able to use this. We hope that this will be able to strengthen existing partnerships, to build additional partnerships with those that are involved in SDG16 plus now, and those that will be interested in further coming into the community. And with that, I'm afraid I still might have talked for too long, but I will stop here and turn it back over to John in terms of what next steps actually might be. Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot, Maggie. And yeah, again, I think everything that Maggie just mentioned, obviously there's a lot to unpack. There's a lot of content in this resource. Obviously, sometimes it can be difficult to digest these types of resources and the information within them. So one of the things Maggie just mentioned, next steps. Where do we go from here with this resource? Obviously, we want to make it practical. We want to make it useful for practitioners working on SDG16 plus and the VNR process and on implementation. So I think the first step for us is to make it a bit more accessible. We want to make this into an online resource, not just this PDF report that goes online that you can obviously read through yourself. But we want to have an interactive portal where colleagues can access this information in a much more easily accessible way. An online format also allows us to put it up there online. It'll allow you to translate it in your browsers through browser extensions. So if you need it in another language, as we work on translations for the resource itself, you can always translate that way with digital content. So we really want to make this kind of an e-learning platform on the SDG16 hub going forward. So that's, I think, the first and foremost, that's the first step that we'll take, is make this a little bit more easily accessible so that all of you can not just digest the information, but also contribute information and case studies. We also want to hear from you. If you feel that there's something that we've missed, for example, we want to showcase content and case studies from your experiences as well. So an interactive portal going forward. The next is we'll host a series of thematic workshops over the first quarter of next year. So this won't be the last opportunity that you'll have to engage with us on these topics. We're still working on confirming the actual topics, but and the actual details of each of these webinars. But for those of you that want to stay up to date on our plans going forward, you can visit our website. There's a link here in the presentation, but you can visit the SDG16 hub. And you can register, you can sign up to get updates, including information about these webinar series, these sets of workshops going forward. And then the third area that we're looking to advance with this resource going forward is engaging at the national level. So especially in preparation for the 2021 HLPF, where SDG16 is under review again, we want to work with colleagues at the national level to really help unpack, again, what needs to happen leading up to the VNR presentation to prepare a government to actually then follow up on the report and then prepare themselves to report the next cycle. And so obviously there's a lot to learn from the experiences of many colleagues, but I think what we really want to do is look to take this forward with all of you. So again, if you want to stay in the loop with us, stay updated, you can also let us know if you have potential opportunities for national engagement as well. There are a lot of opportunities that you can find on the SDG16 Hub going forward around this resource. I think I'll stop there because, again, there's a lot of information to unpack, but again, please do follow up with us. We'll have a Q&A after this as well, so if you want to ask questions in the Q&A chat box, please do, and we're happy to answer any questions on the resource or on any of these next steps. So thanks.
Thank you so much, John and Maggie. That was super helpful. And as John mentioned, all our resources are going to be on the SDG16 Hub. We have two discussants who are going to just give brief remarks. I'd like to introduce Marie-Ève Boyer-Friedrich. She is a representative, a human rights officer from the why am I getting this wrong? UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights for the past 11 years. Too many, it's too early morning. In 2015, she joined the Dakar Regional Office as a capacity building officer and covered 16 countries of West Africa. She's now based out of Geneva, very much working on the treaty body capacity building program, where she develops tools to support states' engagement with UN HR mechanisms, including the UPR, which we're familiar with, the Universal Periodic Review, and to UN treaty bodies. So I welcome her. OHCHR is part of the Global Alliance for Reporting Progress on Peaceful, Just, and Inclusive Societies, along with 6 other UN agencies. So they were also a very active partner in this resource. Welcome, Marie-Ève.
Thank you very much, Priya. Sometimes it's easier to just call it the UN Human Rights Office because usually people confuse also with the High Commissioner for Refugees, which doesn't help, definitely. Hi, everyone, and happy to be with you as a discussant. Maybe, of course, I mean, what was asked to me was to focus a bit more on the imperatives of human rights based approaches and the partnerships in the VNR processes, but beyond actually as well, as John Romano said. The VNR is not an end in itself. It's a reporting process, but if it is disconnected from the implementation, then I think everything, I mean, the goal will have not been met. I'm not going to restate, of course, that the 2030 agenda is very much embedded in human rights. And if you look at SDG16, even more so.
Can I just one interruption? Can you just raise your volume a little bit? People are saying you're hard to hear.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure. Can you hear me better now? Or isn't it enough? Otherwise, I'll just take out my headphones.
That is better.
That is better.
Okay. Oh, they're saying not better. Then I think from New York we can hear you, but I think others from all over.
Okay. Can you hear me better now? Much better. Okay, great. No, so what I was saying is, of course, we can always state the obvious. I mean, what we think is obvious now, which is that the 2030 agenda is strongly embedded in human rights through this very important concept of leaving no one behind, but also through the fact that most SDGs are related to human rights. And therefore, the UN considers that we can make more use of all the reporting system that exists around human rights to inform voluntary national processes, but more importantly, to inform the implementation of the 2030 agenda. And there is definitely here a missed opportunity right now, because in the analysis and a number of analyses that has been made specifically on specific topics of the current VNRs, the VNRs that have been drafted so far, we see that basically states and the ministries that are involved in VNRs are not actually the same as the structures at the national level that usually are involved to report on human rights. And actually the 2030 agenda and clause F really mentions the importance to build on existing processes. Building on existing processes means also building on existing structures. At the national level, very often you have what we call in our human rights jargon, national mechanisms on reporting and follow-up. These are governmental structures that have been established, usually within the Ministry of Justice or Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and they are in charge of engaging with the human rights international bodies. Mr. Troya mentioned the Universal Periodic Review, which is the Human Rights Council review of the situation, the human rights situation in all states. But you also have the reviews by independent experts, like the Committee on the Rights of the Child, or the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. They have a dialogue with states. They engage with states based on a report on the situation, on the human rights situation. And very often those actually aspects that are dealt with are related to SDG16. I'm just showing you now, I would like just to show you an infographic that stems out of any review made in the context of the Universal Periodic Review. Here you have Angola. In this infographic, you see that out of all the recommendations made to Angola, 41% of those recommendations were related to SDG16. This means that both Angola, in its report, has addressed SDG16 to a large extent, saying what progress it has made in this regard, but also then the recommendations coming from states were related to SDG16. So this shows that this is definitely a tool that can be more used. I'm going to put in the chat box for ease of reference a number of links where you can find that information or other maybe useful information. Maybe a last point before, two last points. Another thing that we can learn from the human rights, I would say, cycle is the engagement of stakeholders, because those national structures, when they report to the Universal Periodic Review or to treaty bodies, they of course are asked to engage with a number of stakeholders, civil society, marginalized groups, groups left behind. I think that the SDG coordination structures in some countries can learn a lot from the experience of their peers. Last thing is related to one of the questions that was put forward as a point of discussion, which is related to what good examples of innovation in SDG monitoring and reporting. And here I would like to point to a tool that we have developed at OHHR that we make available to states who request. And it's what we call the National Recommendations Tracking Database, where basically all the recommendations that have been formulated by human rights bodies to that state can be extracted and basically followed up upon. And you can follow those things up per SDG, including according to SDG16. So I will stop there, and always happy to discuss further.
Thanks so much, Marie-Ève. I'd like to welcome our second discussant, Florence. Forgive me if I'm mispronouncing it. It's Dievo. It's the country coordinator of the SDGs Kenya Forum. She is a renowned civil society coalition builder, coordinator, and campaigner to end poverty and inequalities in all its forums. She initially worked as a youth champion for the Millennium Development Goals with the Ministry of Devolution and Planning. And now she is following has a vast coalition building experience and is appointed the country coordinator of the SDGs Kenya Forum in 2016. Take it away, Florence.
Thank you very much, Priya. I hope my sound is okay. So thank you so much to the TAP colleagues. It's always a pleasure, and also always speaking in the SDG 16 forums. And so very quickly, just to comment the work that has been done so far, and also to bring the voice from a national level. And so for the SDGs Kenya Forum, for those that maybe we have not interacted with, we are a Kenyan civil society coalition that is championing SDGs from SDG 1 to SDG 17. And the most amazing part is we also sit in the National Interagency Technical Working Committee on SDGs. That's the highest organ within Kenya SDG implementation and monitoring and review process. And so within this particular Interagency Technical Working Committee, currently we are the co-chairs. The chair is the national government, State Department of Planning, the SDGs unit, and we chair it as Civil Society Coalition, but also with the private sector umbrella body called Kenya Private Sector Alliance, KEPSA. And so what's been very amazing is that so far is that we've been able to sort of come jointly from a multi-stakeholder perspective to sort of contribute to the VNRs. And so Kenya volunteered in 2017 and also in 2020, but also with an internal biannual reporting, a 2-year reporting system that was done for the very first time in 2019. And so just speaking strongly about the SDG16 is that this year there was a much more improvement. The only targets that the Kenyan coalition led by Article 19 and Action Aid Kenya did not sort of maybe touch on 2 targets. That's target 16.2 and target 16.8. And so we have, the report is very rich and you can find it online on the SDGs Kenya website. You'll find that the civil society organizations managed to touch on 16.1, 3 all the way to 16.10. For us, this has been a very huge improvement compared to the first voluntary national review of 2017. And some of the things also highlighted in this particular report is, for example, a very strong component on leaving no one behind, how the SDGs interlink, alignment to the national policies of Kenya, but also the civil society organizations went further to speak about the plans they have for 2020, specific recommendations that included issues of freedom of expression, access to information and public participation, issues of corruption and illicit financial flows. Yeah, so further, some of the gaps identified by civil society organizations, I could just maybe very quickly talk about them, is the issue of limited coordination and creation of synergy among civil society organizations, especially focusing on children's rights. And as I said before, there was a gap within 16.2. And so then how do we strengthen that? And there's a lack of a policy to guide implementation of access to information, the legal framework, whereas we already have this policy, but the implementation process is not very well defined. And then also there's inadequate research around internal media houses. There's a lot of continuous attacks and violation of rights of journalists and media workers. Contributions of human rights defenders and CSOs to development many times is not very adequately captured. And so the civil society here also, even if they're collaborating with government, you can see them we have been pointing out some of the gaps that exist within the Bureau of Statistics. And also the last gap identified is on issues of non-recognition of civil society generated data. And so a lot of data in Kenya that is considered official is still data that is produced by the Kenya Bureau of Statistics. There's a process that is ongoing to make that, to generate citizen-generated guidelines, but this has been an hindrance to SDG16 reporting, but also to other SDGs. And then lastly, I'd also talk about opportunities that civil society organizations have been identifying within the VNR process. And this, of course, is within the multi-stakeholder coalition that Kenya has for the SDGs, how to then ensure that they can be reporting and feedback within that particular platform. And so there are a number of meetings, like right now, tomorrow, we are starting our national multi-stakeholder forum, and we'll be able to speak about some of the issues, especially also on SDG 16. There's continuous capacity building for SDG 16 members and also the other SDG coalitions, and then follow up of the implementation of the VNR and recommendations. For the very first time, we want, as a Kenyan coalition, to ensure that there could be a follow-up mechanism and follow up on the VNR recommendations. And then also, how then do we involve like members of parliament in terms of the laws that are there or the gaps that are already existing within that. Yeah, so in conclusion, I would say that it's very important, as the first speaker, I think first or second speaker said, in terms of how then do we ensure that civil society organizations are effectively engaged, but also provided a platform that they can be able to sort of not just report, but also do the follow-up mechanisms, but also the implementation processes at the national level. And so for us, it's just to share the Kenyan experience, but also we would love to, we're always open to learning from other countries and what is being done. Lastly, the VNR Kenyan report for 2020, the government one, the Kenyan government one, if you look at it, you'll find the civil society report has been put as an appendix. It's part of the annex, which is a very good practice in terms of ensuring that the report is not censored, that whatever the civil society organization provided is captured in holistic, even when it's integrated within the main report. And so that's something that we have worked for in terms of really ensuring the Kenyan government can annex our report holistically. So those are some of the practices and within the Kenyan space and how what we've been doing within the SDG16. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Florence and Marie-Ève. Those were super helpful interventions. One is showing us the specific case in Kenya, and Marie-Ève was bringing to the table some of the other tools that are available to really coordinate the human rights reporting to VNR reporting, so super useful. I am going to open up the floor for questions. We have a few in the chat as well as a few raised hands, so I will call on the Ngo Federation. I'll go through a few of the questions before the panelists respond. So let's start with the Ngo Federation of Nepal. If I can invite you to speak and ask your question. Not sure if he's can. Okay. Oh, I saw you unmute there. Otherwise, I think your question is in the chat. Is it not? Let me look through it. In the meantime, can I ask Yudi Budiman to put his question forward?
Hello.
Hello. Go ahead.
Hello. Thank you very much. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Nice to all of you. Hi, John. Thank you. I would like to bring the role of Supreme Audit Institution because we see from the publication of the TAP network and Global is mentioned clearly about the role of SAI in regard to the SDGs goal 16. Our concern is about how we can build the possible collaboration going forward, because every year as a mandate SAI around the world, they produce financial audit, compliance audit, as well as performance audit regarding the performance of the inclusive, effective institution. So meaning to say all the information that we needed in regard to the SDGs goal 16 is already there in the audit report that published from the SAI. So how you can take forward this kind of collaboration using the information available in the report published by SAI in respective countries. Thank you.
We'll go to a few more questions that are in the chat. We have a question from the chair of the Alliance of the NGOs on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice. Oh, he's saying he's going to inform his civil society members about the hub. We have one more question that's come to me through email, which I will read off my email account. How do folks on the ground find out what or where the VNR input platform is for civil society in their home country? And this comes from Sheila, who's the UN NGO representative, the Society of the Sacred Heart. Are there any ones? Let me just move this down. Go ahead, I'm going to unmute Ngo Federation of Nepal. Just unmute yourself because you can speak. Yes, there you go.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for a comprehensive presentation. My name is Arjun Bhatrai. I represent Ngo Federation of Nepal and also the Nepal SDG Forum. It is the national umbrella of Nepalese NGOs, and also the Nepal SDG Forum is a collective effort of Nepalese civil society and other stakeholders. So one my small contribution and one questions. The contribution is like the National NGO Federation and the Nepal SDG Forum is doing this going to publish a report related about the SDG and human rights. And also we published the last year about this report, and it's very important. And second things, we are doing like how informal data to make formal. It means we are discussing with the government of Nepal, so how the civil society data we can include with the national process, because in 2021 the Nepal government is having a census, so we want to engage the census process, but there's a some difficulties to actually the data of actually the human rights and democracy. So how we count the data of human rights and democracy. Sometimes it's a very hard to to get actual figure out. So I don't know if there's any kinds of good experience or any practices or any case study how to analyze the data of human rights or democracy or peace or justice, because it's very difficult to count in the figures. So is there any suggestion or good practices or case study which is useful for us? So that is my question. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Okay, there's a couple more, but I think we'll take a pause and just take that round. Who would like to go first? Okay, go for it, John.
Great, thanks, Priya. And yeah, thanks very much for the questions. To the first question from Yuri on engaging with Supreme Audit institutions, I think what we found from the report, and obviously Maggie can maybe provide more details on this as well, is that I think the value of Supreme Audit institutions, well, there are many values, but I think one of the most important things about Supreme Audit institutions are that they are supposed to be independent. And I think this is a good opportunity for us to engage, well, I say us, meaning civil society. It's a great opportunity for civil society to engage with Supreme Audit institutions, particularly because these institutions often have the ability, or even in some cases, the authority to actually do advocacy and take into consideration many perspectives, including from civil society. So I think in a lot of cases, what we've seen is civil society working with Supreme Audit institutions in advocacy around their reports, around some of the findings that the SAI comes up with, and especially when it comes to audits of the SDGs. We've seen Supreme Audit institutions in some cases do SDG audits, which I think also has a lot of potential as well. There's a lot more information if you are a civil society organization on how to engage with Supreme Audit institutions in one of the TAP Network's resources called the SDG Accountability Handbook. There's a full chapter on how to engage with Supreme Audit institutions. It's really easy to find. It's just sdgaccountability.org. So if you are interested in engaging with Supreme Audit institutions, there's a lot more information there. The question on VNR platforms, national platforms, how to identify and engage with this. I think this is one of the challenges as civil society, is identifying who to actually work with from the government. In many cases, obviously the VNR process is it's multi-stakeholder, it's interministerial. So there are many colleagues that I'm sure you will have to engage with. But I do think that part of the value of a civil society network like the TAP network, for example, but there are also others like Action for Sustainable Development and Together 2030 and Forest, taking advantage of civil society networks that are engaged in this process already, and some of these national CSO platforms that have a direct line of engagement with the government. Engaging with these platforms can often help because I think this is one of the shortcomings of the VNR process in general, is that I think governments tend to consult with those that they already have a strong relationship with, which often leaves a lot of CSOs, particularly those that work at the grassroots level and don't have the capacity to engage at that level. It often leaves those organizations behind. So I would really recommend engaging with some of those global networks and some of the national CSO platforms. Yeah, so just a couple of insights there.
Okay, there's a couple of more questions. I see Deirdre has her hand up.
Well, Priya, can I?
Oh, sure. Go ahead. If you have one more.
Just to quickly comment on the SAI question. I think it's a really great question. I think particularly now, SAIs and other oversight bodies are under increasing strain, but there are interesting kind of partnership mechanisms and means by which Supreme Audit institutions, other kind of independent oversight bodies can actually also work with Parliament in order, in kind of a mutual strengthening process, whether it's in terms of budget allocation or in terms of mandate bolstering. And I think so how to better engage with SAIs at a national level. I'd also look to parliamentary resources and parliamentary avenues that might exist. Obviously, one of the roles of Parliament is to actually bring in citizen perspectives and the representational function. So SAIs at a national level, engaging with them, they usually have kind of outreach offices, but then also think about your legislative options and representation at local levels. There's also an organization called Intosai, and they might also be able to help in terms of guidance and engaging with Supreme Audit institutions. They are a global body, basically a global coordinating body for SAIs. And then in terms of engaging with the VNR at a local level, as John mentioned, finding NGOs, different civil society coalitions that work at national level, but at local levels, but have national partnerships and relationships is definitely an avenue. And I think John also mentioned one of the challenges, which is that governments, in many cases, understandably, they work with those that they already know. So finding ways by which to broaden, to become included in the process, and then therefore to broaden government's stakeholder engagement and consultative process is of increasing value. There are case studies in this resource that show how that's been done by certain civil society organizations on the ground. So please do look. Hopefully, the case studies will offer some insight both on the SAI front and UN offices to engage with as well as the civil society civil society's role in broadening the pool of perspectives that are included at a local level and then are channeled up to a national level.
Thank you. I think Marie-Ève wants to come in as well. Go ahead, Marie-Ève.
Thank you. No, very briefly on the question and the comment raised by the representative of the Ngo Federation of Nepal. Indeed, that's a tricky issue because very often SDG16 related data are sensitive, and there's definitely a gap there. And I just wanted to mention one of the good practices, which is basically the memorandum of understanding that was concluded between national statistics offices and national human rights institutions, because as you know, national human rights institutions, they have a monitoring mandate. They monitor the human rights situation in the country, and they are supposed to be independent, which is of course not always the case. So in their monitoring mandate, they collect a lot of information. And we have some good practices from some countries, like I can cite Kenya or Palestine, but there are a number of others, where basically there was an agreement signed between the National Statistics Office and the National Human Rights Institution. And national human rights institutions would provide the information that they would get, of course, respecting confidentiality of the complaints received, etc. But a number of data that they have and that feeds into their own reporting that would be channeled to National Statistics Office to inform actually progress made in relation to SDG16. So I just wanted to mention that this is one of the possibilities as well to fill those gaps. Thank you.
Okay, we will. I will ask Deirdre. She's had her hand up for a while to pose her question.
Thanks very much, Priya. And my name is Deirdre de Burka. I'm the Advocacy Coordinator with FORUS, which is a global civil society network. We have 69 national development platforms and 7 regional coalitions. And we really cover all the regions of the world. And I'd just like to acknowledge the great work that the TAP network and the Global Alliance on Goal 16 have done in supporting our members in their engagement with SDG16, because there's a huge interest in it amongst our members. And in fact, FORUS produced a report on Goal 16 this year for the High Level Political Forum in 2020. It was based on 18 case studies from different countries around the world. And it highlighted, the growing restrictions on freedom of expression, of assembly and association across all of these countries. So one of the recommendations of the report was that there was a need when it comes to reviewing Goal 16 for an expanded range of civic space indicators, because at the moment the civic space indicator that's used is what's called an outcome indicator. It looks at the number of, for example, journalists and human rights defenders and so on that are kidnapped, tortured, thrown into prison and so on. But it doesn't look at process indicators. In other words, the kind of processes that governments have in place to ensure that civic space and that the fundamental rights of civil society and the public are respected, and neither do they look at structural indicators, which are more the kind of efforts the government makes to provide for the kind of resources and otherwise that will be needed in order to ensure a healthy civic space. So my question really is, do any of the panelists see much scope for a campaign, even a global level campaign, to try to lobby for an expanded range of civic space indicators? There is a review of indicators happening on the expert group, the IAEG, in 2024, I think finalizing in 2025. And do the panel think there's much scope, firstly, for this kind of strong pressure from civil society activists internationally to have those civic space indicators widened and expanded? And the second one is whether there's also scope, because our members, I think, would really appreciate sort of a bottom-up approach to educating them about how to produce their own civic space indicators, sort of localized and contextualized civic space indicators, and that there would be more ownership then by civil society if those kind of workshops could be organized where activists at a local and national level could think of ways themselves, think of the kind of indicators that would be useful for them in monitoring their government's respect and promotion of and support for civic space. So just wondering about those two questions, whether the panelists could give me their views on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Deirdre. I'll read one more question from the chat. It's posed by Joshua Felix. Compliments of the season to all the participants, and thank you for the brainstorming initiative. I would like to have advice that such a resource should be domesticated to a wider civic space in sub-Saharan Africa, especially Nigeria, where GBV, human rights abuse, and violence conflicts are on the increase. So looking for ideas on how to do that, and hoping to brainstorm a little bit further on
that. Priya, I think you're muted.
Sorry, who would like to go first? John, are you?
Sure, since I have an open mic,
yeah.
Might as well. I think especially on Deirdre's question on measuring civic space, I mean, this is a huge challenge, notwithstanding the indicators issue here, the global indicators issue. But I think I've engaged in the interagency and expert group discussions for a while now, and know the challenges of that whole process for developing those global indicators. And I think the challenge for instituting a broader range of civic space indicators or fundamental freedom indicators at the global level through this group is the fact that Target 16.10 focuses on protecting fundamental freedoms, which obviously goes beyond media freedom and the killing of journalists, the indicator that you mentioned for 16.10. But the difficulty is then coming up with a composite indicator that measures fundamental freedoms in its entirety without having it be, 20 or 30 indicators. And then have, the burden is then on national statistical offices to then report on these, a multitude of indicators. So I think that's the challenge. But I do agree that we need to expand the scope of indicators that we use to measure civic space. But I do think that because of that challenge at the global level, I think setting the priority on how national governments and national statistical offices and national human rights institutions take up data and put together indicators and collect data on these issues. I think that's where we should start, because I think eventually, if you have enough governments reporting on these indicators and collecting this data, eventually what we've seen through this process, the global indicators process as well, is that you need to have that foundation of many countries reporting on it in order for it to be considered for a global indicator, for example. But I do think that the more we have national governments and national statistical offices using these indicators at the national level and collecting this data, the more it will be used at the global level, if that makes sense. And also there's a lot of work that's been done on this topic by the Praia City Group, the Praia Group on Governance Statistics. They recently launched what they call the Governance Statistics Handbook, which I think we also mentioned in this mainstreaming SDG16 resource. That's also a really great resource for unpacking how to measure really complex issues within SDG16. So if you really want to get into the details on the measurement, there's a lot of information there in that resource. And then on civic space indicators at the local level, I mean, this is a really great point, because what it really takes is not just these outcome indicators, like you mentioned, Deirdre, but how do we get information from civil society groups that are experiencing this shrinking civic space? We've always said that we need more perception-based and experiential data to back up what governments would use for in administrative data, for example, to say, we are making progress on this issue because of this administrative data point. But turning this into real terms, how are people experiencing progress? And I think, again, we need to focus on the qualitative data on top of quantitative data, which obviously is a challenge in bringing those two together. But I do think that one really helpful resource and group working on this is Civicus. Civicus has what they call the Civicus Monitor, which does just this. The objective really is to ensure that civil society in countries provide their qualitative assessment of how they experience civic space in their own contexts, to really complement what the quantitative data is telling us. Because I don't think that any government is going to really say that they have a closed or restricted civic space in their own, put forward by their own country. So the question is, how do we ensure that we're getting civil society that tells us what the reality is? And I think that's a big challenge. But there's a Civicus Monitor, there's a lot more resources out there.
Lawrence, did you want to come in and respond? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. Great conversations. Mine is just to agree with the question that was posed about maybe campaigns. And I believe it's very, very crucial for us to sort of also be able to sort of come up with campaigns or ways of, just ensuring that we can laud some of the things that are coming out from the VNR, the asks, the recommendations and so forth. I say this because I remember, like during the Millennium Development Goals and the debt cancellation, there was a debt cancellation campaign that was very, very effective in many national level countries. And so there's space for that kind of advocacy, there's space for that kind of collaboration. And so I feel like there's within the SDGs implementation so far, maybe there's not been as much campaigns targeting some of the critical asks, especially on some of these critical goals like SDG16. And I believe as John indicated, in terms of maybe the increase of indicators, there could be opportunities for us to do that. So I think coming from a national level, I believe that there's space for that, and also it creates awareness. It sort of brings us the mobilization of critical groups and marginalized groups, and then how do you give them a platform? How do you give them a voice? How do they identify with some of these processes and campaigns and organized interventions sort of do that for groups like that, marginalized groups, and the target audience that you're talking about, leaving no one behind. Yeah, so for me, I think that would be something that would be very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think I see any other questions. Is there any last thoughts that anyone would like to come in on from the attendees, from the participants? Okay, we have 3 minutes left. I think we will close. I wanted to sincerely thank all the speakers that have come here today to present. We're, like I said, just getting started. The publication was a lot of work, but now that we have this resource, we're really looking at opportunities and ways to use it and to have our citizens across the globe learn from it and share it widely. So as John mentioned, in the short term, we're rolling out some webinars from January to March. It's the nature of where we are right now that everything has to be online, but we're really looking at ways to showcase some of the lessons learned and successes in a variety of ways. And one of the webinars will look more closely at the Leave No One Behind issues that have been raised here more broadly, but go deeper in depth to really try to see how to reach those that are most affected by this goal and how to engage them more and inform that conversation. We're also looking at having a session on localization. There's a lot of interesting work coming out from the cities and subnational conversations on voluntary local reviews, so hoping to roll that out as well, and then really looking at practical ways in which to mainstream SDG16 into national policies and plans going forward, and hopefully a few more in Q2. And of course, this resource is so rich that we are looking at ways to make it more interactive, as John said, and hope to do that over the course of the next few months. So thank you again. There's several links here in the Zoom chat box. So I hope you've managed to get them all in your notes, and we will look forward to seeing you again in the new year. Be well, take very good care, and hopefully eventually we can see each other in person by next summer, optimistically speaking. So let's see how the things evolve, but I feel like there is a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel of this nutty year. So be well and take very good care. Thank you.